Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, it's time for our first interview, and I'm delighted to be joined by the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan. Sadiq, very good to see you. We'll get on to the whole Windrush and position of the Home Secretary in a moment or two, but you have a slightly complicated relationship with the US President. Do you welcome his presence? Will you welcome his presence in London on July the 13th?
I've been quite clear. I thought our Prime Minister was wrong in the speed with which she invited the President to a state visit to
Well, that's
our
not
country.
happening now. He's coming on a...
So I welcome. There's no state visit happening. The red carpet won't be rolled out. But I think it's really important. We have good relations with our closest ally. We have a special relationship with them. And that means speaking to them regularly, having a working relationship. And so it's right and proper that our Prime Minister should meet regularly with the President of the USA. It gives us an opportunity as London to show the President we are open,
there will be, I think,
diverse.
probably demonstrations, protests against him here in London. Do you think those protests are a good thing?
Well, the key thing is this, look, I think there will be protests. I speak to Londoners every day of the week, and I think they will use the rights they have to express their freedom of speech.
But will you endorse those protests?
The key thing is this, they must be peaceful. They must be lawful. It's a conversation we've got to have with the government about whether we need additional resources. I think we're OK for policing. We're used to police in Commonwealth Heads of Conference. We're used to police in protests. The key thing is any protests there are must be peaceful, must be lawful.
Protests? Will you be on the... on a stage protesting his visit?
As the Mayor of London, it's probably inappropriate for me to join a protest when foreign leaders come into the UK. It's important, though, for me not to be scared to express my views about some of the things he has said. By the way, we talk about the hostile environment in this country created by our government. Well, there's a hostile environment in that country created by their president as well, and it's ironic, in this of all weeks, the architect of the hostile environment in this country has invited the architect of the hostile environment in the USA to London.
I mean, he said some pretty insidious things about you. Would you expect an apology if he's coming over?
It's not about apologising to me. I do think he should apologise, actually, for retweeting the tweets of a far-right group which has been set up intentionally to sow the seeds of division.
And he hasn't done that yet,
well, he hasn't done that. And I think he should apologise. And actually, look, will you compare and contrast how President Macron spent the afternoon with a civil rights activist, John Lewis, went to George Washington University, gave a lecture to the Americans about the importance of climate change, about the Paris Agreement, about the importance of not being protectionist, about having a multilateral deal reducing nuclear weapons with Iran. Compare and contrast that with our Prime Minister Theresa May.
Now, you are calling unambiguously, I think, for the Home Secretary to go. Why do that before she makes her statement?
Well, can I just say this? Up until now, I've deliberately not, and actually specifically said, it's not appropriate for me to talk about the resignations of senior members of the government.
So why have you changed your position?
Well, let me tell you why. I think this is a question not just of competence, it's also a question of conduct. But also, I think there needs to be an acceptance that what's happened to the Windrush generation isn't an anomaly. It's not due to an administrative error. It's a consequence of the hostile environment created by this government. Let me give you some examples of that hostile environment. Go home fans going around the most ethnically diverse parts of our city. Go home are words that I relate to as somebody who grew up in the 70s and 80s, used by the National Front. Tens of thousands as a target from this government.
Can I ask you on the Go Home vans? A while back, you were asked whether you thought these Go Home slogans were racist. You didn't say they were. Have you changed your mind on that?
No, I said the politicians weren't racist. Go Home, the connotations clearly are racist. Clearly they are. I remember...
That is tougher than you said, because I want to ask you about this, because the hostile environment has been created over many years. Do you now recognise that maybe you could have been tougher in standing up to that hostile environment when you were on the Labour front bench?
Well, I'll send you copies of speeches I gave and things that I said in relation to a whole host of issues on this very area, dating back to when I first became a Member of Parliament, let alone when I was a front bencher.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But you nonetheless wrote to UKIP supporters saying that Labour had got it wrong on immigration.
No, I didn't. It's really important here, because and I'll explain this. The point I'm making is we've got to address people's fears, not play on them. And what UKIP and others have done have played on people's fears. The reason why there's no decent housing is because of the immigrants. The reason why you're waiting for NHS treatment because of the immigrants. The reason why your son or daughter can't get into the schools is because of immigration. My point is to explain to people why there are challenges around finite public resources.
Maybe your nuances were lost. Maybe you could have just been a bit more forthright, standing up for migrants and immigration.
We've got a choice. We can see the rise of narrow nationalist parties and copy and imitate the behaviour of UKIP and others, a la Theresa May and this government since 2010, or take the time to explain the challenges we face. Look, the Windrush generation is just one example of people who contribute to our country. Think about the 3.5 million EU citizens who play a huge role economically, socially and culturally. Put yourselves in their shoes. How are they feeling now when they've seen how the Windrush generation have been treated by this government? What confidence do they have?
On that point, the Prime Minister has left open the possibility of giving preferential immigration rights to EU citizens over citizens from the rest of the world after Brexit. Would she be right to do that, to give preferential rights to EU citizens after Brexit?
Yes.
So that's a policy that you would stand up and support her on?
Absolutely.
Now, with 25 years since that appalling murder of Stephen Lawrence, his lawyer, or Doreen Lawrence's lawyer, excuse me, Imran Khan, said recently that he fears that there is still institutional racism within our police force. Do you agree with that?
Well, I was with Doreen and Imran last night, and I think the point Imran was trying to make, having watched one of the episodes of the 3 episodes made, is some of the attitudes of those police officers who investigated Stephen's death were clearly institutionally racist. I think there's been huge progress made. The new commissioner understands. Never enough. Look, we should be impatient for change. We need to see far more black, Asian, minority ethnic officers on merit promoted to top levels of the police service. We need to improve on recruitment. We need to see more women in the police service. We police by consent.
Can I just ask you to make a distinction? There's obviously, in all organisations, there will be elements of racism, but do you think the police force is still institutionally racist?
I think most institutions in our country have issues with institutional racism. The definition from Macpherson was unwitting prejudice caused by a number of factors. I suspect there is still unwitting prejudice in main political parties, dare I say, in the ITV, dare I say, in the police service and other public authorities as well. The key thing is the leadership at the top must make sure there's a zero tolerance towards this, and we have policies in place and an action plan to address that. I think we've been too slow. We've got to accelerate progress.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about knife crime after the break, but since we're on, you know, the tragedy of the Lawrence case, the other really interesting statement that I thought was made recently was by Clive Driscoll, who was the retired Detective Chief Inspector who was involved in the case. He said he understood why young people carry knives because they don't have enough confidence in the police that they'll be protected.
Well, Driscoll was explaining, not excusing.
No, but he was explaining, and it's a very frightening thing he's saying.
I've spoken to young people, and some of the explanations they give for carrying the knife is they feel safer with a knife than without a knife. Gives them a sense of respect.
So what more can the police do to reassure them that the police are on their side?
We police by consent. It's really important that we have the confidence of the public to keep them safe. The police can't do it by themselves. There are now only 30,000 police officers in London. If there were 8.8 million Londoners helping them, we'd have a better job. That means I'm really proud we've had the biggest rollout of body-worn cameras in the world here in London. That will give the public confidence in the interactions with the police. Will give the police more confidence to use targeted, intelligence-led stop and search. The police need us to help them and cooperate with them when there are crimes committed or when somebody's carrying a knife. Look, you as a big brother or a big sister, or a mum, dad, uncle, auntie, are doing the young person in your family a disservice if you're not stopping them leaving home with a knife. But if they are leaving home with a knife, please report it to the police. You're keeping that young person safe and the community safe too as well.
Well, our guest this morning, Sadiq Khan, has the biggest direct democratic mandate of any politician in UK history. That's quite something, isn't it? 1.3 million people voted directly for you. Now, the question then is what you do with that power. Let's look back at your predecessors. We've got Ken Livingstone. When he left office, 44% satisfied with him, and these are what the public generally think of as his legacies: congestion charge introduction, Oyster card introduction, and then that successful Olympic bid. Then that's not a bad list, is it? Then next up, Boris Johnson. Now, pollsters actually asked people what they thought his legacies were and are. You've got the cycle hire scheme, also known as the Boris bikes. That annoys some people. You've got the 2012 Olympics again, and then also that introduction of the London living wage. So, Sadiq Khan, you are 2 years in, you have 2 more years. What do you want your big 3 to be?
We want to make real progress in challenging air quality in London. Air quality leads to premature deaths, leads to children with underdeveloped lungs and older people suffering all sorts of illnesses. We want to make real progress on fixing the housing crisis in London. Good news, last year, record starts in affordable homes in London. For social homes, we started more last year than the previous 4 years. And thirdly, we need to make progress on transport infrastructure. Our city is growing. I was really pleased that we've introduced the unlimited bus travel for an hour. We've frozen TfL fares, and we need to make sure the Elizabeth line opens this year and the Northern Line extension takes place. We've got to plan for the growth in our city.
Which is the hardest of those three?
Housing, because we can't do without government support. In the last year, the monies we received from central government was half what we got in the last year of the Labour government. We need central government to take the challenges of London, other cities and towns across our country seriously. That's why this Thursday...
The Tories, though, allege that you're
Labour.
backing away from the targets you set during your campaign on housing.
Not at all. I've thrown in the bin the dodgy definition of affordable home. Kate can tell you about London. A home that costs almost £500,000 is not affordable. A home where you pay 80% of market value of rent is not affordable. I've thrown that definition in the bin. I don't apologise for throwing it in the bin. My definition is either a social rent, council rent, a London living rent linked to your earnings, a third of average earnings, rather than market value of property, or shared ownership part rent. I'm sorry the Tories don't agree with me on that.
But what more can you do? Because part of it is changing the restrictions on planning.
Absolutely. And so what I'm doing is working with developers to make sure the quid pro quo for them building market value homes is half should be genuinely affordable. There's a fast-track process. They could do 35% genuinely affordable. Working with developers. We're releasing surplus transport on the land, using that land to make sure we work with developers and councils to build genuinely affordable homes. I can't do it on my own, though.
And when are you going to impose a more serious, effectively, tax on diesel?
What we've done is we've introduced the world's first toxicity charge last year. So if your car is, roughly speaking, 2004 or older, the most polluting car, you've got to pay more to come into
but frankly, diesel, all the evidence shows that actually more modern diesel cars are still a problem.
Yeah, well new diesel are better than old petrol. In 2019, we'll introduce the world's first low-emission zone in central London. It will roll out to all of London for buses, lorries and coaches by 2020, and all vehicles will be covered up to the North and South Circular by 2021. So we're taking action, by the way, with no government support, and that's why we need the government to work with us to challenge this issue, to take on this issue.
Now, we've got the local elections on Thursday. If you're a Jewish Londoner and you've heard what the leading Jewish groups have said about Labour, Jeremy Corbyn, failing to deal adequately with anti-Semitism in Labour, why would you, as a Jewish Londoner, vote for Labour?
By the way, it's not just Londoners of Jewish faith who are concerned about this, it's other Londoners as well. And it's something we saw during my campaign as well, when Ken Livingstone made the comments that he made in the lead-up to 2016.
Do you think Livingstone should be out of the Labour by now?
On the evidence I've seen, yes. Of course, there's got to be due process. But, you know, there can be no place in our party for anybody with racist views. If you're anti-Semitic, you're racist.
I mean, the leadership groups for Labour say they can't understand why due process has taken so long.
Nor do I. I mean, some of these allegations are so open and shut. Some of the things that have been said are so clearly anti-Semitic. I don't see why it takes so long. So I'm really pleased the new General Secretary is accelerating the investigations, and Jeremy Corbyn and she have said there should be speedy progress in the next couple of months.
Thing on that, they also want him to adopt in full, with the examples, the main international definition of anti-Semitism. Should he do that?
Well, that's essentially for the committee that decides the rules, but I've got no objection to doing that. I think it's really important. Look, there should be no hierarchy with racism. Anti-Semitism is the same as other racism, and the problem is this, Robert. The people you're referring to, Londoners of Jewish faith and others, think there's some sort of hierarchy, think it's OK to be a member of our party and be anti-Semitic. There should be no place in our party for anybody who holds these views.
Sadiq Khan, thank you so much for joining us. Come back soon. Let's pick up some of that with my distinguished croissant corner. No croissants, bacon sandwich, and you're tucking in, which we like to...
I'm 25% of the way through. I'm hoping to make 100% progress by the end of the program.
Well done. Now, we talked a bit about the Windrush problem for the Tory party, but, I mean, your party has got a problem over widespread concerns that, you know, you're not tough enough on anti-Semites within your party. Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, has thrown his weight behind those critics.
No, absolutely right, and he's absolutely right. And we haven't been tough enough, and we haven't taken it on early enough. But we are.
Does Jeremy Corbyn get it yet?
I genuinely think Jeremy does. I mean, I don't think anyone could accuse Jeremy of being anti-Semitic. It is what has happened over a period of time is he is
Does he
very...
have a problem being critical of his friends who might be anti-Semitic?
Well, that may be, you know, we've all had friends in the past that we may not particularly like as such. But I think the issue's been probably that a lot of people within Labour do not like the policies of the Israeli government. And sometimes these two things get inflated, that if you're actually criticising policies of the Israeli government, you're seen as anti-Semitic. But absolutely without a doubt, I think now the party has got this, and if we don't do, and I understand why Sadiq said, I can't understand how these processes within our party take so long, and if our new General Secretary doesn't get these right, and it's not just on issues to do with anti-Semitic views, it's to do with some of the other issues that are coming up that people have been accused of. Yes, and they've been waiting for ages and ages. Yep. We've got to get it sorted.
The visit of Donald Trump, do you think it's appropriate for, you know, there could be thousands and thousands of British people on the streets protesting? Is that the right way to respond?
Well, I mean, I think people will want to protest, and they're absolutely within their rights to do so. Donald Trump is somebody who advocates policies and ideas which are
Could you see yourself out protesting?
Absolutely. You know, I'll have to make sure a baby's happy being in a sling. but assuming they are, then I'm very up for that. And you know, because and I was on the Women's March the day after Trump's inauguration for the same reason. You know, this is a man who has bragged about sexually assaulting women, mocked people with disabilities, demonises entire religions, and I think that is very dangerous. Now, of course, the government has to engage with them, but I think it's appropriate that British people say this is not somebody who stands for values that are values that we share. You know, I think he is an anathema to British values of tolerance and respect for others.
Ed, very briefly, do you think his visit will be good or bad for the Prime Minister?
Well, it's interesting that Trump is as deeply unpopular in France with French public opinion as he is here. But Macron's visit, I think, was a triumph. And I think, fundamentally, the job of the Prime Minister is to have a good relationship with the United States, a very close ally of ours. I think that Macron has given her some lessons, because I think Macron didn't shy away from critiquing American policy. And I think perhaps, actually, if the Prime Minister was bolder and more sure of her views, it could play very well if she stands up to Trump on some of these important issues.
We may not like him, but he was democratically elected. I protested when when the Chinese came because of what they do in Tibet. You know, protest is absolutely right, but it has to be peaceful.